All right, let's jump right in. We're going to tackle a huge question today. How does a whole country's economy actually work? I know, it sounds super complicated, but we're going to break it all down using some really core ideas from income and employment theory.
I mean, have you ever just looked at all the businesses, the jobs, the prices of things, and wondered, how does this whole machine even stay running? It seems like there are a million moving parts. But you know what? The basic idea behind it all is surprisingly simple. In fact, believe it or not, the entire engine of our national economy is powered by a choice that you, me, and everybody else makes constantly, a lot of times without even thinking twice about it.
And that's it. That's the choice. When you get some money, what's your first instinct? Do you go out and spend it, or do you tuck it away and save it? That one decision, when you multiply it by millions and millions of people, is what we're going to unpack today. Okay, let's get into it. So, this choice between spending, which economists like to call consumption, and saving, this is our very first building block for understanding the whole system. Let's take a look at how we can actually measure this stuff.
Okay, first up is something called the average propensity to consume, or APC for short. Just think of it like a quick snapshot of your spending habits. It's basically asking, out of all the money you make, what fraction of it do you actually spend? The formula is just your consumption divided by your income. Simple as that. So, for example, let's say you make $1,000 and you end up spending 900 of it. Well, your APC is 900 divided by 1,000, which gives you 0.9. It just means you spend 90% of your income.
But here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when you get a little extra cash, like a raise or a bonus? That's where this other idea comes in, the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Now, this is the crucial part. It's not about your total income. It's about what you do with that extra dollar you get. So, let's say your income goes up by $100, and because of that, you decide to spend $80 more than you usually would. Your MPC is that change, that $80, divided by the new income of $100. So it's 0.8. And this little number right here, this is the secret key to understanding how an economy really grows. All right, so we've got the individual choice down. Now let's zoom out and see how this one decision scales up from your wallet to the spending power of the entire nation. The total amount of planned spending in an economy, which we call aggregate demand, is really just the sum of four big pieces. First, you've got consumption, or C. That's all of us, households spending our money. Second is investment, I. That's businesses spending. Third is government spending, G. And last, you have net exports, which is just what we sell to other countries minus what we buy from them. And this chart here shows exactly how it all stacks up. See that bottom line? That's our base level of consumption, C. Then we add what businesses are investing, I, and that bumps the line up. Then you stack government spending, G, on top of that. And finally, net exports, that top line, AE, that's it. That's the total planned spending for the whole economy. Okay, so that's the demand side of the equation, what everybody wants to buy. But that's only half the story, right? What about the supply side? What can the country actually produce? When these two forces meet, that's where we find the economy's sweet spot, or what we call equilibrium. Aggregate supply is pretty straightforward. It's just the total value of everything a country produces in a year. And here's the cool thing. Because all the money from making that stuff has to go to someone as income, like wages or profits, aggregate supply is actually the same thing as national income. And this right here brings us to the central tension in all of macroeconomics. What happens if what we all plan to spend doesn't perfectly line up with what the country is actually making? Well, that's when things start to get really interesting. Now check this out. This slide shows us two different ways of picturing that economic balance. The graph on the left has total spending on the vertical axis and total income on the horizontal one. That 45-degree line represents every point where spending and income are perfectly equal. So our balance point, our equilibrium, is right there at point E, where our spending line crosses it. Now look at the graph on the right. It shows the exact same thing, just from a different angle. It shows the point where what we save is equal to what businesses invest. They're really just two sides of the same balanced coin. But, life isn't always perfectly in balance, is it? So what happens when the economy gets tilted, when spending and production get out of sync? This leads to some very real-world problems that affect every single one of us. So sometimes, everyone wants to spend more money than the economy can possibly handle, even when it's running at full capacity. You can see it on the graph where that AE1 spending line is way above the full employment point E.
That gap is called an inflationary gap. It's the classic case of too much money chasing too few goods, and what that does is push prices up, which, you guessed it, causes inflation. And then you have the flip side. What if total spending, that AE1 line, is too low to buy up everything the economy could be making? Well, that's a deflationary gap. Suddenly, businesses have all this stuff they can't sell. Inventories start piling up. And what do? They have to cut back on production and, well, that unfortunately means laying people off, and that leads directly to unemployment. So if the economy is struggling with either too much spending or not nearly enough, what can we actually do about it? Well, this is where governments and central banks roll up their sleeves and step in with a pretty powerful set of tools to try and steer things back to balance. You've basically got two major toolkits. On one hand, you have fiscal policy. That's the government using its budget, taxes, and spending to nudge the economy. On the other hand, you have monetary policy, and that's the central bank's job. They manage the money supply and interest rates to try and keep things on track. So to fight inflation when the economy's running too hot, the whole game is about cooling things down, right? You want to reduce spending. The government can do that by raising taxes or by cutting its own spending. Meanwhile, the central bank can raise interest rates, which makes it more expensive for people and businesses to borrow money and spend. And if you need to fight unemployment because demand is too low, you do the exact opposite. The government can cut taxes, leaving more money in our pockets, or it can ramp up spending on big projects to create jobs. And a central bank? It can lower interest rates to make borrowing cheaper and encourage everyone to start spending again. And it's so important to remember what's really at stake here. As this quote reminds us, we're not just talking about numbers on a chart. We're talking about involuntary unemployment. People who want to work, who are ready to work, but just can't find a job. That's the real problem all of these economic tools are trying to solve. Which kind of leaves us with this one big nagging question, doesn't it? If we have this really sophisticated toolkit and we understand how the economy works, then why is getting that perfect, stable balance so incredibly difficult and so rare in the real world? Well, that's the challenge that keeps economists and policymakers up at night. Thanks for joining me.